mistakes are inherent in the creative process. I was really stuck doing this monologue and my teacher said, I want you to do it the worst that you can, horribly. It was so freeing. And sometimes you need to really crap all over a scene sometimes in order to go, oh, wait, there's something in there. Because that's how you get better.
Hey, it's Guy Raz, and this is The Great Creators, where I have conversations with some of the most accomplished actors, musicians, and performers of our time. And on the show today, Julie Bowen. Julie Bowen won back-to-back Emmys for her role as Claire Dunphy on the ABC sitcom Modern Family. It was an iconic role, and a role Julie didn't think she would get because when she auditioned, she was 6 months pregnant with twins. So today on the show, the 20-year journey that led to that moment, plus her new show, Hysteria, based on the satanic panic of the 1980s. It's a great conversation. Julie is super candid about her career and the anxiety she feels around achievement and even identity. So let's jump right into my conversation with Julie Bowen. I read that she had studied Italian Renaissance art at Brown University, and so that's where we started. Well, we have lots to talk about. I'm particularly interested in, my family, my wife and my kids, we just did in June, we did a very intensive 3-week trip to Italy. And my wife is obsessed with Renaissance history. So we went to like Urbino and, not just Siena and Florence and, not just the Medici and Sforza worlds. Like we went to like places that actually we went to Urbino and there were no tourists. And Italy's jammed with tourists now.
Wait a minute. Urbino had no tourists. I keep waiting to take – how old are your kids?
13 and 15.
Okay, so I've got 15, and 17, and I'm waiting until they are begging me to go because I'm not going to spend that kind of time if they aren't like – and they just started saying, when are we going to go? When do we get to go to Italy? When do we get to go to Europe? And I was like, all right, now when you're ready to walk through museums and be respectful and take an interest.
Yeah. We had a great, amazing guide in Urbino, and we were there, from 8 in the morning until 6 at night, and so it's small, as you probably remember.
Yeah.
And my boys were with us for I would say 3 hours, and then they took off and did their own thing. Like they didn't want to go into the palace for hours and hours and hours and see the wood paneled library where the Duke used to hang out and read. But it was amazing. It was just amazing. I hadn't been there since I was 18 or 19 as a student.
Yeah, I haven't been back since I was a student, and I believe you bring this up because I was an Italian Renaissance Studies major,
yes,
which is a very specific and very limited focus of study.
Well, let's start there. So I saw that this was your college major, Italian Renaissance Studies. And on the one hand, people would think, well, what are you going to do with that? But the thing is that the Italian Renaissance was like one of the greatest periods of innovation in history. Like if you're thinking about, there's a famous speech that Steve Jobs gave, many years ago about a calligraphy class he took that changed his life and how it actually influenced Apple. And you can imagine like reading Machiavelli or studying the Medicis or any of the great artists like Raphael or Michelangelo or Leonardo. Like there's actually a lot you could probably apply that to in life.
There is a lot, and there's a lot that translates to the entertainment business now. These were people, the Medicis were patrons, they were the original networks, the original studios. You had to get paid. People didn't just do art because they felt like it. They needed to have patrons and they felt constricted. Michelangelo hated being a painter, and he was forced to paint Hated it.
And he thought he was being punished by painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel.
On his back for how many years? Hated every minute of it.
Because Raphael got the side panels, and he was like, "How come he got the side panels?"
And why? All I want to do is do my carvings. He wanted to do his statues, and he needed to make people happy so that he could get the money, so that he could do what he really wanted to do, and that is something that I feel like is very applicable to right now. We all are making these choices. You do you do a job to make people happy, to get some money. We all have a boss, even in the creative arts, and that hasn't changed.
Yeah. So this was what you studied when you were in college at Brown. So many people we've had on the show are children of actors and or grew up in that world or just had this passion from really early age. And, they were theater kids or they went to Broadway with their parents once and just changed their life. And did you have any, sense that was what you wanted to do when you got to college?
I did is the short answer. And the long answer is, I had two sisters. I am the middle of three sisters.
And you grew up in Baltimore.
In Baltimore,
right?
yes. Yeah. And as most families, you tend to get assigned certain labels. My younger sister was always the doctor. She was the doctor from the minute she was born. She's very bright. She is, in fact, an infectious disease specialist in San Francisco now. And,
oh, really?
Yeah, and she was always the doctor. And my older sister, Molly, was the actress. And it was sort of, that was her thing. So as much as I wanted to be an actor and, my parents growing up in Baltimore in the 70s, they go outside and play, come home when it's dark, not much television, very little time in front of a screen, and we put on plays. That's what we would do. We would put on plays. We would use the dogs, the neighbors. There was a horse, whatever we could find, we would put on these plays. Yeah. And it was what we all did together, but somehow Molly was going to be the actress, and then I was supposed to be the artist. And so I was signed up for weekend drawing classes, and I was doing like charcoal studies of an apple in a pitcher with a bunch of 50-year-olds. And I was like, I'm not really into this. And I secretly always wanted to be the actor, but I knew that was I felt like that was Molly's and I wasn't supposed to encroach on it. And then as life went on, I discovered I did some theater at Brown, but I wasn't a theater major.
Yeah.
But my senior year, a guy came through who was doing an indie. And back then it was hard to get things on film. Like you didn't have a camera in your pocket that you could capture anything with. So It was kind of a big deal. And it was a black and white, very moody period piece. And I got the lead. And I fell undeniably in love with film, much more than I did. Theater I loved, but film, I thought, this is the best. I loved the camaraderie. I loved the feeling that every single shot, you felt all these people working with you, even if the camera was only focused on me. I couldn't get enough of it. And I was like, well, I'm declaring myself. I'm telling my parents that this is what I'm doing. No one was happy, but that's what I did.
How did you, I think the film was called Five Spot Jewel.
Yes.
And how did you know what to do in front of a camera? I mean, I know you had done a couple of shows in college, but still, like, there are very few people who are just like out of the box, ready to go. Even people with raw talent need to understand how to move and how to speak to a camera. And how did you know what to do?
Well, it was such a tiny film. I mean, it was such a little tiny indie. Most of the days it was like the director, somebody doing the lights, someone doing sound, and maybe a PA or two, and someone who was maybe helping with as a DP. I don't remember. But that helped so much because you weren't many layers divorced from, oh, that's happening over there. I guess they're going to light that shot. You just standing there the whole time, looking through the camera. This is what we're going to see. And very quickly, it was like, if I'm really close on your face, don't move your face. I'm like, oh. And that's very quickly translatable. You go, right, if you're further away, you can move more. If you get closer, that's capturing every single thing. And I learned to read lenses really fast from the other side of the camera. Like most actors can look at a lens that's pointing at them and tell you what the lens is.
Yeah.
If you've been around long enough. And I always ask, but I'm always like, if you're here, it's very different than if you're here, if you're tiny in the frame, if you're huge in the frame. And things like that are just very technical. And I loved that because I felt like those those limitations and constrictions were actually helpful in my creative process.
At that point in your life, because you're like 21, 22, had you taken any acting classes?
When I did Five Spot Jewel, that first indie movie, no. But I immediately went and signed up for acting classes because I thought, oh, I want to do this. And I think I need to find out, really seriously what's behind all of this. So I signed up. I was like, what's the hardest thing? Shakespeare. So I signed up to do Shakespeare.
And so for you, that was the sort of the catalyst. That was where you decide, I'm going to pursue this. I'm going to move to New York, and I'm going to try to become an actor.
Yeah. And my parents were very clear, like they gave me an education. They gave me all the tools I needed to go out there and earn money. Now we're in the 90s. They're like, you have every tool at your disposal. We have given them to you. We do not ask for anything in return. If you decide that you want to go be in the arts, you're on your own. So I found that really freeing. I started waiting tables, taking classes, acting classes in New York. I saved up all my money so in the summers I could go. I did Shakespeare and Company, which is at the Mount, where Edith Wharton wrote and lived, which is a gorgeous place. It's amazing. And then I went to, I spent a summer in Oxford in England doing Shakespeare, just studying and learning. And, I just thought I need to know as much as I can, even if I'm never using it. It felt like foundational to be able to give me confidence. And I'm a nerd who really loves school. Like, I can never give up school. I'm always trying to go back to school. So it was helpful.
So you get to New York and you enroll at the Actors Studio, which is a pretty august, right, institution, thinking this is what you want to do. Like, I want to do theater, right? And also waiting tables, and it's New York in the early 90s. And I remember New York in the early 90s. It was in some ways better than New York today because it was actually affordable. Comparatively affordable, but it was rougher. It was like a rougher kind. It wasn't, there's a sort of a Disney-esque quality to parts of New York now. It's so clean and so nice.
It was gritty. It was definitely gritty.
It was gritty, yeah.
I forgot that I had enrolled in the Actors Studio. It's hilarious that you say that because I only lasted one session, term, year, whatever it was, because, and again, that was just my lack of education about different acting forms. I was like, well, I'm going to study Shakespeare, and then what's the hardest stuff that they do, for contemporary acting? I was like, method. I'm signing up. And after, I feel like that scene in, the song in Chorus Line, when they're all talking about how they can't smell the coffee cup, or I feel the rain, I feel the wind. I spent months crawling on the floor, pretending to be a cat, smelling coffee. And it was not, and no shade, but it was just not for me. And then I went to the Actors Institute, which was great. And that was just a different, it was Meisner, which was just a different way of training. And that worked for me much better.
Tell me a little bit about what happened in the theater world, because you were not
I didn't get hired.
You weren't a successful theater. Yeah, and by the way, we had a conversation about a year ago with Tom Hanks on the show, and he wanted to be a Shakespearean actor, as you may know his story. That's why he went to New York. Like, he got an opportunity to audition for Bosom Buddies among 1,000 actors, and he was picked. But he really wanted to do Shakespeare in New York, and he just didn't get work.
That's my story. Tom Hanks stole my story. I did not know that about Tom, but actually, yes. And there's always a feeling of imposter syndrome. Many actors have regardless, but that because I never, cracked the theater nut, that I wasn't a real actor. It was all I wanted to do. And I begrudgingly, I started doing commercials and day playing on soap operas. And I was getting jobs in television. And I thought, I needed to make money. If this is how I'm going to make a living, it's time to go to LA and just do it. But I also knew that was sort of not permanently closing a door necessarily, but I was walking away from my dream of doing theater. And now I feel like if you try and go from TV and Hollywood stuff back to theater, you better sing and dance, or they are gonna laugh and point. I fear those New York critics. So I'm never say never, but I don't look for theater work anymore.
Tell me what prompted you to move out to LA? Because from everything I've read, you were kind of, and I don't mean this pejoratively, but you were kind of a theater snob. You thought that
I'm
was
a snob. I'm just a snob.
A lot, but a lot of it's very common for young people to be like sort of adamant of, sort of intransigent in the way they see the world, right? It's just common. I remember feeling that way, and you're just like, oh, they're idiots, they're sellouts, those people are this or that. And of course, as you grow, you change and your perspective changes. But you thought of theater as what a serious person does, and that LA was like a not serious place. So what prompted you to go there?
First of all, I was a really good student, and I loved school.
Yeah.
And school gives you this structure, and they even give you grades. Like, it is so sort of simple to know, how am I doing? Yeah. You're doing this, you're getting an A. And that I really prioritized intellectual learning above everything else, which is why I thought Shakespeare, the theater, has been anything heady and thinky was superior to anything sort of emotive. And I have since learned, we get older and you go, oh, feelings count, emotional intelligence counts, being a human being in this moment, it actually does matter. But at the time, I just needed to make rent. And I was bouncing between blessings. I love you, Andrew Smith. One of my father's roommates from college had a tiny apartment in New York and a tiny house out here in Hollywood. And for $300 a month, I could stay at either one. And I wasn't ready to move to LA. I was terrified. And he would let me come and I could stay for the weekend, and then I could come back and stay in his tiny apartment in New York. And we would flip-flop, which was a little crazy because sometimes we would be in the same place at the same time, which raised a lot of eyebrows. But no, he was always a very protective, polite person. And that gave me the opportunity to kind of dip my toe in and audition. And right away in LA, I started getting jobs. I mean, within a few weeks. So I was like, I guess I got to go where the love is.
Yeah. Getting bit like small parts, small roles in
No, I got I got a series. I got a movie Showtime was doing a series of remakes of B movies. And I did Runaway Daughters.
And you got that within weeks of
Yes.
writing to...
So
wow.
I was like, this is... I got here in the summer, and I remember by the fall I was shooting that, and I was like, hang on a second. I had been doing commercials and whatnot in New York, so I right away started working. I did a series that first year. I got Happy Gilmore that first year. So I was like, I guess this is where I live now. But I had so many what we would now call side hustles that I wouldn't give them all up. I was a reader for HBO in New York and then in LA, both, where
reading
scripts and books and basically doing coverage on them for execs who have piles and piles.
While you were also
on set.
Doing
Yes.
on set. Okay.
While I was waiting tables, while I was auditioning, while I was on set. And you got paid more for a book. You get $100 for a book. And like a script was like 50. So I was like, give me the books, give me the books. And I would just stay up all night and read the books and do the coverage because I was like, I can do this. And I remember being on the set of, I think it was Happy Gilmore. And one of the producers, somebody said, you're actually a working actor. You don't have to do that. And I was like,
right.
We'll see. We'll see. I wasn't ready to let go of my steady income stream just yet.
I mean, these are jobs generally done by recent college grads. You were, but interns oftentimes, right, to make some money. I remember I had friends who did that kind of work. So when you got to that world, when you start to kind of get some of these roles, how did you? I don't know. How did you feel in that? I mean that you were in an Adam Sandler movie by that point. He was already very famous,
Well, he was,
and you had a pretty major role.
He was famous, but he had done. I knew him from Saturday Night Live. That was the big, and then he had done Billy Madison, which was kind of a culty hit, and I thought Happy Gilmore would be like Billy Madison. It'd be a little under the radar, fun, like low key, and no one would really see it. Like my parents are never going to see this movie, and yes, I was wrong. I was wrong. But I never think about who's watching this when you're doing it, or else you'll lose your mind. You just have to do the work in front of you.
How did you? I mean, sort of, you came from a completely different world than so many of the people around you. Like you had been to Brown, and you had this sort of, you came from this kind of culture of academic achievement, right? Like, and you mentioned this, and into a world where that doesn't really matter and shouldn't matter, right? Like that's not something that people really care about or value. And I wonder whether I don't know, did it in any way kind of just affect your perspective, or did you downplay it, or did you just, I don't know.
I have to say, it never occurred to me that right away I said I got that job for Showtime, and we were doing this 1950s B-movie remake with Jenny Lewis, who is a famous singer now in oh my gosh, what's the name of her band? Jenny Lewis, and she's not Fleet Foxes. I can't remember she's wild.
Yeah, she did the record. She did the record with Ben Gibbard, the Postal Service record.
She's fantastic,
record,
and she was an actor at the time, and she had been a child actor, and there was another woman on it who had been a child actor. There was this up and coming guy no one had heard of named Paul Rudd, and who you could just tell you were like, that one. I sat there going, I have nothing to talk about. They all had the last job they did and the next job they did. And then remember women, like just normal set conversation, nothing obnoxious about it, just lovely, normal. And I thought, oh my gosh, I want to fit in with these people, but this is like the first set I've been on consistently. And one of the hair makeup people said, honey, what's your story? And I was like, I gave them the broad strokes, and I was an Italian Renaissance Studies major. They went, what? And everyone stops and turns, and they were fascinated, and they wanted to hear more. And I realized, oh, I'm exotic here.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing. And I never wanted to lean into it because I know it's obnoxious, especially to lean into like Ivy League BS. But I definitely felt, it's great to have something to talk about other than your last job and your next job. And I think that's why I keep going back to school. I keep studying things. I keep informally studying things. I'm deep down the rabbit hole right now, Guy, on the history of anti-Semitism. I am so dark down that hole, it's crazy. But I love learning, and I feel like that moment in that trailer kind of validated something for me that was, have something else to talk about besides just what you did on set and where, who was cute and what happened at, craft services that day.
Yeah. I'm curious about that time in your life because you had a lot of work throughout the 90s, a lot of television work and even some films, American Werewolf in Paris and a few other films. But was there a sense of anxiety? Did you ever feel the sense of like, I need something more permanent instead of doing 2 episodes of this show or 5 episodes of this show? Like I really do you remember feeling that, or did you feel like, okay, I'm in my 20s and things are really popping and this is good?
I definitely would panic when there was dead times and feel like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm a person that likes structure. I'm not great with constantly looking for my next job. I like to be able to plan things out. Just not the right mindset for an actor, for sure. But yeah, I would panic for sure. Luckily, my sister, Molly, who then, by the way, I became the actor and she became the artist. We just flip-flopped. She's a fantastic designer. Luckily, she was already in LA, or she came after me. And between the two of us, there was always somebody always had dead time. And we were like, what are we going to do? We started tutoring. I started taking classes at UCLA. Like,
this is between gigs?
I'm not good. I'm very bad at sitting around. It is.
Yeah.
It's actually, and it sounds like a humble brag, like, oh, I just can't even. But it is something that I've strived to be better at as I get older, not to see myself as the sum total of a to-do list.
It's a form of anxiety, right? It's but also an engine of creativity, right? Because I mean, that kind of fear of just I don't, and I think it comes from a primal place of like I need to provide for myself. It's a real thing.
Yeah. Oh.
But it can also be a really powerful motivator to like push you forward. Like
I think the hardest part is when I always liken it to being a drug addict, because when you're a drug addict, your life is very simple. If you're looking for heroin and you got to get your fix that day, that's it. And you do what needs to be done to get that thing. And when you are struggling as an actor, you take whatever job you can get. You don't have to question it. You're just like, they're hiring me? They're paying me? Yes. When you start to get a little bit more safety in your bank account, just like a tiny bit more security, and then you're forced to actually make choices about which way you want your life and your career to go, that's actually, to me, was much scarier than wondering, going, oh my God, can I pay the rent? Once I got over that hump a little and said, I can pay the rent. I don't have to take every single job. What do I want to be in this business? I might have some options, and I'm not sure what I want this to look like. There was a while when I just said, what would Annette Bening do? Like the WWABD, what would Annette Bening do? And I would ask myself that every time I'd read a script or say yes to a job. I'm like, don't say yes yet. What would Annette Bening do?
You were doing a lot of dramatic roles, mainly, right? And I mean, obviously you did Happy Gilmore, but much of your work, from what I gather at that time, was dramatic work until that series came on. That was really, I think, your first like sort of role in it. You were on the show for 4 years, but you had a sort of recurring, permanent part of that cast. Was doing comedy something that you were looking to do, or wasn't that not really on your radar necessarily?
I remember auditioning for other shows around that time, and whenever it was pilot season, which used to exist, where you had 5 auditions a day, and I kept saying to my managers, I'm not funny. Please don't send me in for these comedies. I'm not funny. And they always said, well, Helen Hunt always said she wasn't funny either, and she got mad about you. There's different forms of funny, and we know that you're funny in real life, but I can't tell a joke. That the set up joke sitcoms. Oh my God. I wish I could do them, but I'm terrible at them. So I never thought that I would ever get a comedy. And the fact that Ed was an hour long, and at a time when, Ally McBeal had just gone on the air. And so there was this world of dramedy where there was, shows that were an hour long and had a real mix of both. So I thought, well, I can do that. And once I met Tom Cavanaugh, who played Ed, we had the best chemistry. And as in most of the things I've done as far as acting, it's all about who you're talking to. And if that person, you connect with them, the rest just flows.
I read this quote from Stephen Levitan, who, of course, would have eventually cast you in Modern Family, where you played Claire Dunphy, this role that became sort of a archetypal American sitcom character, like in the canon of sitcom characters, it's in there, right? And so, and he said something to the effect of like, when we first met Julie, we'd seen her work and we were all impressed with it, but she didn't strike us immediately just in person as the person who could do this role or who we wanted for this role. And I think it was sort of it's a very sort of roundabout compliment because he's essentially saying she brings this charisma and energy like to the camera, and so sometimes maybe she's holding back in real life. I don't know. Do you know what I'm talking about?
It's funny. I don't know that he said that about me. That's interesting. I know that
he said in real life.
Yeah.
He said, thank God for the things that never happened. We got lucky. She charmed us as Julie. But in real life, she hadn't shown that color to this extent. And he says because she's so pretty, she's often cast in serious roles. She's so anyway. Goes on to say that he wasn't able to see those things right away. He wasn't able to see you as you were right away.
So auditioning for that show was so painful because I was pregnant with twins, very pregnant, and I think because of, I don't know, it's not HIPAA laws because it's for medicine, but they've some sort of employment law. They couldn't ask me how pregnant I was, and I was so enormous that they kept bringing me back in and just sort of staring at my stomach. And I realized after, many months later, they thought, well, she's going to have this baby any day now. And what I didn't realize is that they really liked me. I felt like they just kept coming in just sort of staring at my stomach. And I'm like, what is this? And finally somebody said, do you have like a due date for this baby? And I said, oh, there's 2 of them. It's going to get much worse. And it's in May. And they were like, because we were in February now. And I looked like I was ready to go, but for one baby. And I thought, I went home and cried. I just cried and cried because I said, that job isn't mine. And I knew that was the best job out there at the time. I was auditioning. I'd read everything and I was like.
And they looked at hundreds
of
potential Claires.
I know. There's a parallel universe where that just didn't click. And I shudder because I do think many people could have done the Claire role. Many people could not have done Ed or Sophia or I think everybody else. But I'm like, so many people could have done the Claire role, and I was freaking blessed. I don't know how I got so lucky. I was as nervous and neurotic about getting that job as Claire was in the pilot, and I think that probably helped.
I wonder if that theme, and certainly that role, of course, sort of propelled you to this next level of stardom and recognition and probably changed your life in ways that you couldn't even have anticipated. Because probably before that, you might have been recognized occasionally, when you're at a coffee shop or something. But this was going to be different. I mean, this was one of the biggest shows on television in the United States.
Yeah, and like internationally. And that was during the Obama, who was he running against?
Yeah.
McCain. And they both they both said they loved Modern Family. And you're just like, what? Like, what are you talking about? But I have to say at the same time, I gave birth to my twins. I already had a 2-year-old. And I gave birth to the twins on May 7th, 2009. And while I was in labor, between contractions, it was boring. So I answered the phone when it rang, and it was Steve Levitan calling to say the show got picked up. And I was like, oh, that's great. And then, I gotta go. And he said, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm in labor. He goes, why did you pick up the phone? I was like, it's not that much fun. So my whole life went from having 1 kid to having 3, to, breastfeeding and diapers and everything. Every aspect of my life got so different that in a way I kind of didn't feel the Modern Family wave. I mean, Jesse was going to Monaco and people were flying all over the world to promote the show. And I said, I can't go anywhere. I got all these babies. I definitely felt it as far as like getting, paparazzi popping out of bushes and stuff like that. But as my life still is, it's like, I'm not J-Lo. It's not all the time and it's not never. So it is still constantly surprising and my adrenal system can't handle it. I'm like, oh, sorry. Okay. When people sort of pop up or want to take a picture or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you say, like, lots of people could have played that character, and that's probably, sort of objectively true, but it's hard to imagine somebody else playing that character because you were her for
11 years.
11 years. And you gave birth in May. The show premieres in September. So you had a very busy summer. 11 seasons, right? I mean, that's so incredible. I mean, even hugely successful shows, if they do 4 or 5 seasons, that's a massive triumph. 11 seasons. Did it feel like there was something special, like that cast? The even before it premiered, did you have a sense that this is going to be something different?
I knew right away. I knew when I read it. I was like, well, this is the best thing that's out there right now, and it's killing me. I'm not going to get it, and I was sobbing over it. I knew that from the writing.
Yeah.
And then when we all got together, when we were cast, and I was terrified because I thought, oh no, I thought Sophia's going to be some cartoon character of like mean lady. I never met Eric. Jesse seemed nice. Ty, I never met these people, and I was terrified. And after that first table read, I realized, oh my God, this is special. It's very, very special. And I do recall by the time we did the Halloween episode, I think it was the first year, and Eric Stone Street was underneath he had to be under the table and pop up under one of those turkey serving hoods. What do you call those? The domes, the turkey dome.
Right.
And someone had to take it off for him each time, which was hilarious. It's because, he's a big, strong man, and to have to be like, get this thing off me. And somebody pulled off. He goes, guys, this might be crazy, but I think we are filming an episode of classic television, like a genuinely classic episode. And we all were like, don't say it, but yeah, you could feel it. It was crazy. It just felt like nothing else I had ever done. And all the cylinders were clicking. There wasn't a moment where then the camera turns to somebody and you go, oh, she's not so great, or he's not so great. It was just everybody was carrying their weight, and it felt fantastic.
Tell me a little bit about when you feel like you started to hit your stride. I mean, I've read quotes of yours saying, initially I thought I was going to be like the Greek chorus coming in, and now the men fight.
Yes.
and obviously your role became central to that. Seeing it now also for me is different because I've got teenage children, and my life and the sort of, interactions with my wife more reflects that than when it came out, because we had a baby, it was just slightly different. And so how you sort of were able to turn that role into something that it became.
I think at first I felt like a lot like I did on Ed, where I said, I don't really know about comedy, but I could see Tom Cavanaugh was so lovely and great and dynamic. And I was like, all I have to really do is really pay attention and just literally react, and I'm going to be okay. And when I got in those rooms with, Ty and Eric and Jesse and Sophia and Ed, I felt the same way. Like, okay, I don't really know what I'm doing, but they sure as hell do. And I just have to keep going. But what saved me over and over was the fact that we could tag the camera, that we could look right down the barrel of the camera and break the fourth wall. Because there were times when Ty was so ridiculous or so funny, or Ed was so, whatever character he's being, that I knew instinctively. That's when I first felt at home on that set. I would look, and I could feel the camera coming to me at the same time. Like we had that character really became another actor to play with. Because it wasn't just static. It would, and I could feel it. And we would just look at each other like, that camera was really another character. And I do think that helped establish Claire as well as sort of our sane eyes in this world. Like, she is the lens through which we're going to see a lot of crazy things happening. But then they also let me be crazy myself. So I'm very grateful for that. But that was very, very helpful when I was like, there's chaos. I'm not suddenly going to be like a clown. I'm not sure how to do comedy on top of comedy, but I definitely knew how to check in with the camera, and that was my thing.
I mean, you were on that show 11 years. Everybody grew together. It's like, I think of that film Boyhood that Richard Linklater did, where he filmed it over 20 years, and you actually see the actors grow up in real time. I think they did it over 8 years or something. And this is a version of this. I mean, those kids grew up. Your TV kids became TV teenagers and young adults over that time period. It must have created just a connection, a bond, because you're together for so long.
Oh, without a doubt. And, we went through a lot of stuff together. There was a lot that those kids, people always say, oh, how did you help them or guide them? And I'm like, those were professional kids, all three of my kids, Nolan, Sarah, and Ariel. They'd all worked a ton. They were all very used to talking to the press and the public. They had no fear about, posting things online. I was just like, oh my God, aren't you worried about what people are going to say? Like, no, they were much more savvy and sophisticated, and they were kids. And sometimes I couldn't help myself but to feel incredibly protective of them and just want to wrap my arms around them as a parent. Most of all, I'd have to say, though, that getting to raise Luke, Nolan Gould on TV has literally made me a better boy mom, because I was like, okay, so this is what teenage boys do. They go through phases, and they're into annoying things and weird music, and then it changes, and then they're fascinating. And I was really grateful for that opportunity. And yes, we are very bonded.
And yet, you still, I mean, this may have been something you expressed before the end of Modern Family or after, but that you still have had this fear of like needing to find your next thing, that you're always worried that the thing you're doing is going to be the last thing that. And I totally identify with this, by the way. Like the shows I do and the relationships I have with different distributors and companies, I always feel like this is it. This is the last contract. And I know that some part of that is unhealthy, but part of that I think is maybe sort of a defense mechanism, maybe. And I wonder how you kind of think about it in the context of your life, because you've obviously had a lot of success. You've done very well. You can probably just stop working, although what's the use of that? But what do you think that feeling of like this is the last thing, this might be the last time I get to do this, comes from?
Well, it comes very directly and very literally from my mother, who will say to me, any job, take a picture, it could be your last job. It's not like there's no esoteric mamby-pamby. It is literally my mother saying, make sure you take a picture of your director's chair, because it's the last one you'll ever have. I'm like, okay. And she doesn't mean it like you suck and you're never going to work again. She means it like, you've been so lucky, just appreciate each job as if it's your last, which I have internalized over time. I think what gets really, really hard is, have you read All Fours by Miranda July?
No, but I'm going to write it down right now.
It's intense, but she talks about being a woman in her late 40s and sort of realizing that for your whole life you've been going up, 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 up. And there's this sort of peak moment when you're hovering and you're like, yes, I'm here. I've professionally, creatively, personally. And then you realize you're just going to fall. The rest of your life is going to be the fall. And how do you live in the fall and not see it as a bad thing? What if I never do a job that's as popular as Modern Family? I probably never will. That's okay. Like, you have to be a real person. You have to be a full person with lots of like failures and relationships and invested in friendships and kids, and have a whole life where acting and jobs become almost the last thing that defines you, or that defines me, I should say, in order to survive that feeling of, well, why? all of us. I mean, I saw Eric Stone Street the other day in Deadline. I guess he's doing a new pilot. Of course, I DM'd him, and I'm like, that's awesome. I'm so excited. He doesn't, none of us, I guess, have to work. Who knows what people's financial situations are, but all of us love it. And
Yeah.
if you only are going to do something that's better than Modern Family, then you may never work again. So I'm just trying to do things that are different than Modern Family.
Yeah. And I mean, you think about actors like Jamie Lee Curtis, right? And you think about people might have said, oh, she hit her peak when A Fish Called Wanda came out, or Trading Places. She is more accomplished and more famous today than ever before. I mean, Academy Award winner. She just did this thing on The Bear and was nominated for it. I mean, and she's 65.
And fearlessly 65. Like she looks like a real human being on this earth.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think if you aspire to that, you might be disappointed. I know that for me, I would love to be like Jamie Lee Curtis. Again, what would Annette Bening do? Looking at her body of work over the past few years, she has so much self-respect. The people around her respect her. And she's a lovely human being too. And I just think crossing that line to be one of my heroes, Jamie Lee Curtis, Jodie Foster, Annette Bening. I mean, they're the three biggies right now that you just go, yeah. And the whole world knew you when you were young and beautiful.
Yeah.
And you were celebrated for it. And here you are, as you are, doing great work. And they don't have to do that. They clearly are doing it because they love it. And I hope I still love this. When I grow up. I'm pretty old.
You're not that old because we're about the same age. Tell me about this new series called Hysteria, which I just briefly I'll describe it. It basically is inspired by these satanic his sort of panic, the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s, and I went down a rabbit hole because I remember this people were freaking out about heavy metal music and pentagrams.
Dungeons and Dragons was like some
Dungeons and Dragons.
Terrible,
the McMartin preschool trials that people thought was a satanic ritual, which turned out to be a big hoax, and the kids were manipulated. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy, and it's interesting because I was reading about this time, and I remember it as a kid. And then some of that is similar to like QAnon, some of these kind of conspiracy theories around satanic rituals of elites and so on. But this is a real thing. This new series is inspired by that this sort of time period, and you play the mom of a teenager. And I've seen a couple of episodes.
You've seen a couple of episodes?
Really great.
No way.
I have.
Gosh. I haven't.
Yeah. You don't watch your own stuff, I read.
I don't. I have watched chunks of this because it is so very different than anything I've done before. There's stunts and supernatural stuff, and there's like a pop kind of horror-y aspect to it that I did need to see because doing it, I was like, this is so weird. This is so weird. And our director on the pilot and the finale, Jordan Vogt Roberts, is an incredible visual filmmaker. And so if you're not seeing it, you kind of don't get the story. It's not as much like, oh, that scene went well, I can tell because I was just in it. This is very much also about the style in which it was shot. And so I have watched chunks of it. I can't sit down and watch myself full stop. And I can't watch scary things.
I totally relate to that. I have a hard time watching scary things. I never watch, especially after I had kids. Like I've never really got through Breaking Bad, or Stranger Things was hard for me to watch. But obviously for the work I do, I do watch a lot of things because I'm interviewing people, and I don't want to forget to go down the rabbit hole of this show. But I just want to ask you about this idea of that you don't watch your own things. And I relate to it because I don't listen to my own shows, whether it's How I Built This or I just don't until oftentimes a year or so later, just because I find fault in what I do, which is a horrible kind of, but it's better for me, for my sort of just to keep moving forward. So I don't often listen right away. and you don't watch your own stuff?
I find, the medium of film and television, it is not a play. You don't have full control over your performance.
Yeah.
And if I wanted to have full control over my own performance, I would have to write, direct, produce, shoot, act in. You'd have to do all of it. And I'm not really interested in doing all of those things at once. That feels like too much. It's great to have a collaborator. It's great to feel safe. Jordan got me to do things that I was like, oh, wow, this is, because I'm like, I'm the mom from a sitcom. No one's going to buy this, and he instilled me with a lot of confidence and made it very safe to kind of do some very weird things that are required in the show. I mean, it is weird. There's a lot of questions about like, am I crazy? Am I possessed by the devil? There's a lot of questions that I had while I was even shooting it. So watching myself feels like what I'm really watching, and I have to take into account, is everybody else's work. And I'm watching the editor. I'm watching the director. I'm watching hair and makeup. I'm watching the cinematographer. And sometimes it gets in the way of my enjoyment of just what that scene was. And so I need to, instead of insulting all their work by going, oh my God, I suck, I am awful, like, then don't watch it. Then don't watch it, because what you're really doing is watching a whole bunch of people's work all together. And you're too immature to watch it. Don't watch it.
As somebody who has seen a few episodes, you're great. Your character is really
weird.
And I've only seen the first 2 episodes. Is a very empathetic mom to her son, to that kid who is also a very he's a sympathetic character. You're rooting for him, and I wonder whether that sort of that self-critical thing is particularly intense. Like, are you somebody who is very critical of your own work?
Yes. And also I'll be like, they use that take? I know, what about the one where I know I did it better? I was listening to Gary Oldman on some an interview show the other day, and he said that famous scene where, God, I don't remember what the movie was. They said, who should we get? Who should we call to catch the spy? And he goes, call everybody. And he said, I did that as a lark to make the director laugh, and he used that take. And he's like, it worked out. But like, as an actor, like, anytime the camera's rolling, they get to pick and choose. You can really Frankenstein a performance together to have it be something that feels very different than the one that you thought you were giving. So that is, and that's the process. And I don't begrudge the process. But I probably shouldn't sit in judgment and watch myself then and go, they use that take. What? Didn't I do better than that? No? Oh, God. And then I'm just down a rabbit hole.
I think probably Gary Oldman was talking about
That's what it was.
Soldier Spy, the remake
that's
of
what
that.
It was.
That he played the Alec Guinness role. It was an amazing film. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because talking about Gary Oldman and then thinking about your own sort of approach. And I think there's probably something to this idea of like, you can look at it multiple ways. Not feeling like you're not good enough actually can compel you to get better. Mm-hmm. And with you, like you mentioned earlier, you were a good student and you worked really hard for an A, and you were evaluated and you could see your progress. And so there's this feeling of I need to get better, which to me is actually a great way to approach your profession.
Mistakes are inherent in the creative process. And
yes,
that is the great bummer of the digital age, because digital's cheap. So roll the camera, roll 3 cameras. You know what? Let's get social media cameras in here. Everybody can have their iPhone. There is nothing that isn't somewhere being, for posterity. And there can be a real narrowing of, for me, feeling like, like I want to do one that's bad. One of the things I learned in at the Actors Institute in New York, the greatest lesson I ever learned, I was really stuck doing this monologue, and my teacher said, I want you to do it the worst that you can, horribly. And it was so freeing. And sometimes you need to really just sort of, you need to really crap all over a scene sometimes in order to go, oh, wait, there's something in there. And so it becomes all about the trust, feeling safe. I hate it when they're like, oh, we're just going to have, we're setting up a C camera crew that's doing B-roll for whatever it is. I tighten up because I'm like, every mistake then becomes, available to everybody. And there needs to be a place where you can kind of mess around, because that's how you get better. You get better by making mistakes. And I was really lucky on Hysteria that I felt like the producers and the David Goodman and Matthew Scott Kane, the writers, and Jordan, our director on the pilot, they made it really safe to make mistakes, because there's a danger when you're coming off of, you're like, oh, you're the household name. And people, you just do your Julie thing. And you're like, no, I need you to direct me. And don't tell me it's good if it's not good. It's, I'm going to start here, and then you're going to tell me which way to go. I have to have a director. I don't want to make it up in my head. And they were like, well, Julie just did Julie, and then we'll direct everybody else. You want to be part of the process. So, yes, I think that fear can make you better. And I feel that too many cameras everywhere is really limiting.
How did you become this character, Linda Campbell? I know it's a bit of an abstract question, but I mean, you became Claire over, 11 seasons, and really you were her. I mean, obviously you're a different person, but you were able to convince us that that was who you were. And I wonder how you become. I mean, we're just talking about Linda Campbell now because this is the latest
Hysteria
character you're playing. It could apply to any of the roles you've done, but how did you become her?
When I first read the pilot, I thought, oh, great, it's a mom role. But, and the joke is that now all the roles that are ever often to be like a mom in jail, a mom in space, a mom on a submarine, but they're always a mom. And I'm like, oh, so she's the mom and this is the lead character. And, she's going to stand there and wag her finger, much as I imagine Claire might have to do. And it's just sort of a touch point. But when I talked to Matthew Scott Kane, the show creator, he said, we all live in these news bubbles now. And we all believe whatever we're seeing, whether you are red state, blue state, wherever you're getting your media, we're in these feedback loops. And he said, that's what I want to show, is what happens when a whole town, when a whole group of people gets into a feedback loop and there's nothing to interrupt it. So that hysteria builds and builds and builds. And this is true for everybody, whether you're way left, way right. Everybody seems to be stuck in these feedback loops. So I looked at Linda as a very normal, my entry point for her was like, she's a happy, normal, well-adjusted human being. In general, I could draw off my own life. Like she's here. I can show up as myself. But then when this feedback loop starts happening and you don't know what's real and what's not, that is my waking nightmare, is to be, the facts aren't facts anymore. I think we've all come out of a long cycle where sometimes facts weren't facts. And now on both sides, we all feel that spin is the only thing that matters. And I just allowed that incredible frustration and fear and feeling of anxiety that not knowing what the facts are fill me on a daily basis on that set. And she doesn't end the pilot. I took the job because she doesn't end the pilot. MJ Anthony, who plays my son, doesn't ride off into the night and cool things are happening to teenagers at the end of the pilot. At the end of the pilot, something crazy is happening to Linda Campbell. And is it in her head? Is it happening? Is it real? Has she lost her mind? Is this the beginning of like real dark stuff? Or is this literally the beginning of hysteria? So that was interesting to me.
Yeah, it's amazing that, and you're right. I mean, we do live in these kind of feedback loops, right? And so on the one hand, it is amazing that that happened, that so many people believed this, but it's not, right? Because people believe all kinds of things. We do. I mean, people who think that they are rational also have irrational beliefs,
Yep.
and that's not abnormal. It's not just limited to. I think sometimes people who are educated or live in sort of a world of, I don't know what they may think is more rational. They tend to look down on other parts of society and say, well, how could you believe those things? But it affects everybody. I mean, that kind of the hysteria that the show talks about is
Yes.
real. It's something that many people experience at a certain level.
And we're seeing it. It is very much, I mean, I wouldn't call it a satire, but it very much reflects now. And I think it's easier to watch when you're watching it in the 80s. And it's fun. I mean, it's set in the 80s and the kids play in this death metal band. And it's got all that vibe about it that is both fun and allows you to take a step back, because sometimes you need to take the step back to see it more clearly. But let me tell you, by the end of the season, I still have questions. Like, is this about what is real and what isn't real? And I think that is that's what makes the show fun, and that's the part I could invest in heavily, because the minute I don't know what's real, I'm terrified, paranoid, and Linda gets put through the ringer. There's a lot of surprises in the show, but Linda definitely gets put through the ringer.
Tell me a little bit about how you the kinds of work that you want to do. I mean, this new series obviously, is super fun and could be huge. I mean, it could be, we're talking just as it's released, but this could be a massive series. But I know you've got a production company. You have produced at least one film, I think, Prom Pact. Give me a sense of what you think you want to do. I mean, you're admittedly restless, and you want to work. You want to do things. And I totally understand that feeling. So, what do you imagine? What are the kinds of things that you'd like to try?
Well, I think like a lot of my co-stars from Modern Family, we left that job and we thought, well, nothing will top this. We're never working again. Also, no one was ever going to see anything other than Claire and Phil, and But as I said earlier, we love it. We love being on a set. We love figuring out how to make this work. We love the drama and the comedy. We love all of it. I have to say, working with somebody like super creative on Modern Family, it was the writers, and they just every day you're just like, it was like being fed dessert over and over. You're like, what? This is amazing. And in Hysteria, as a drama, the writing is obviously very important, but especially the directing that came in the pilot. And Jordan saw me in a different way. He was like, no, everybody thinks you're like America's Mom, but I'm going to show you that you can be more than that. And I was like, huh? And he gave me films, a lot of Korean movies, a lot of cinema that I had never been exposed to before, a lot of horror and drama. I couldn't watch the really scary parts, though, mind you. It was like fast forward. And really sort of opened my eyes to all sorts of different genres and cool stuff that's out there. I'm fortunate that I was rewarded in an industry at a time when they were paying people. And I would love to take the time and sort of this next chapter to do something weird and different and meet younger artists who are really breaking out and pushing boundaries, because that's fun. That's really exciting to have somebody sort of say, oh, no, you think you're this, but I see what can happen. I mean, Jordan's like, no, we're putting you in a harness. You're learning to do stunts. You're gonna, cry while you're upside down and flying through the air. And I'm like, huh? And I did it. And I was like, that's actually really cool. I would like to try something. What else have you got? What are the other cool things out there? Holding on to looking, America gets used to your face. You've been in their living room. I could see when people walk up to me in the grocery store and they're like, I love Claire. I love Modern Family. And they kind of are looking, I'm like, yeah, I'm not. That was 15 years ago when it started, so I don't look exactly the same. And shepherding millions of people through adjusting to the aging process is not my job. I just have to look to people like I said, like Jodie Foster, like Annette Bening, who are really heroes and have paved that way and said, you know what, women are fascinating at every single age, and I might actually get more interesting work as I get less Claire looking.
Julie Bowen, thank you so much. Hey, thanks so much for watching my conversation with actress Julie Bowen. Her new show, Hysteria, is now out on Peacock. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to this channel. We post a new conversation every week. And of course, we are also an audio podcast. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts, including Apple and Spotify. Just search for The Great Creators. I'm Guy Raz, and this has been The Great Creators from Built It Productions. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you right back here next week.